Today we'll be talking about bony fish or osteichthyes. These are the bony fish. Oste means bone and ichthyes means fish. There are over 25,000 species of bony fish that inhabit the oceans, lakes, ponds, rivers. Anywhere there's water, just about, you'll find fish in every aquatic habitat. They're very diverse. There's very different looks that fish can have, but all in all, you can still tell it's a fish by looking at it. So we're going to look at the parts of a fish so you can recognize the different parts. First off, we have the head, and it has an eye, a very well-formed eye. The gills are underneath the operculum or gill slit. We have the pectoral fins on the side. These are considered to be paired fins because there's two of them. There's one on each side. Also, the pelvic fins are paired fins. There are two of those. And then we have the anal fin. So the two fins that are on the underside are the pelvic fins and the anal fin. And then on the back we have the dorsal fin. Some fish have only one dorsal fin and some have two. If they have two, then the second one is called the second dorsal fin, the one in the back. The tail is called a caudal fin, which you already learned when we talked about sharks. And these are barbels, which are unique to certain fish, such as the goatfish that we're looking at here now. Most fish have scales, and these are very obvious on this fish, which is a parrotfish. And the bony fish have what's called cycloid or ctenoid scales, and they're overlapping, and they cover the skin of the fish. The mouth is usually terminal, unlike sharks, which were underneath. These are at the end, but not always. And we have the operculum or gill cover, pectoral fin. These are the same fins we just looked at. So we're going to talk a little bit about the gills, operculum, and their circulation system. So if you were to peel back part of the fish and look at it, you can see that the mouth leads into the stomach and the intestine. They have a liver and gonads, which make the eggs or sperm, which come out near the anus and the urogenital opening. Kidneys, they have a lot of the same organs that we do. Now, fish have to stay buoyant in the water, and we talked about sharks already, and sharks have a heterocercal tail and pectoral fins like airplane wings, a large oily liver, and no swim bladder. So these are the things they use to swim. We did talk about this in the section on sharks. In bony fish, they mostly have a swim bladder, which they can fill up with air and it helps them to float. Now, some fish don't have that and they're not buoyant, and they are either very active swimmers, such as a tuna, which just stay up by swimming, or bottom dwellers, such as this hawkfish. Fish are able to extract the oxygen in water. And this is the dissolved oxygen that's in the water. It's not the oxygen of the water molecule itself. This is dissolved oxygen. And they do this in their gills. So this right here is a cutout so you can see the gills, and the water goes in their mouth and then across the gills. They have these gill rakers in the front, and what those do is they take out hard bits of food and things so that they don't get into their gills, because the gills are very delicate. And they have these fine gill filaments. And in those filaments, the water goes in one direction and the blood goes the other direction. So it flows in opposite direction. And what that does is it lets the gill take up the oxygen out of the water. So here we have the water that comes in and flows out of their operculum. And then this is the gill filament right here. And as you go through, you have diffusion, which diffuses the oxygen into the blood, and the deoxygenated blood that already went through the whole body comes in without a lot of oxygen, but as it goes next to the gill, it picks up oxygen and then sends that oxygenated blood to the body. Their blood can take up to 90% of the oxygen out of the water. So we can see here another diagram of that. And what happens is the oxygen poor blood goes in, goes around, and then as it goes through, the water flows over it, and the oxygen diffuses into the blood. So here we can see as the gills pick up oxygen, it's turning red as it has oxygen in it, and it goes to all the organs, and then the organs take the oxygen out of the blood. They use up the oxygen as they work, and then it returns back through the heart and then up through the gills, and it just keeps going around and around. Another problem that fish have is osmoregulation. So seawater is about 35 parts per thousand salt, and the inside of the fish is about 14 parts per thousand. So the fish are going to lose water by osmosis. And if you remember what osmosis means, we'll have a little review. It means the movement of water through a semi-permeable membrane that separates two solutions of differing concentrations, making the concentration of water equal on both sides of the membrane. So what's happening is the water is trying to seek equalization, and so the fish loses water. So the less salty water moves towards the salty water. So here's what it looks like. The fish loses water because the inside of the fish is 14 parts per thousand and the outside is 35. So what fish that live in the ocean need to do is they need to drink a lot of seawater, and excess salt is excreted by their gills, and they produce a very small amount of salty urine. And freshwater fish have exactly the opposite problem because their blood is actually saltier than the water. So they don't drink seawater, they don't drink water because their body absorbs water, and they produce very large amounts of urine. So here we can see the difference between a shark and a cartilaginous fish that's a shark and a bony fish. And shark's blood is very close to the same concentration of salt as the seawater. So the gills in a shark block the loss of urea. They ingest salt with their food, and they excrete the salt by a rectal gland. Next, we'll look at some adaptations to avoid predation. So one is, I'm going to skip that. Symbiosis. Commensalism is a type of symbiosis where the less dominant organism benefits without harming a host. So two things live together, and one benefits and the other one doesn't really get anything out of it, but it's not harmed either. And the example here is a shark with remora on them. So the remora are getting a free ride. They're getting to eat the scraps from the shark, and they're not really bothering the shark too much, although sometimes the sharks seem like they want to knock them off. The next type of symbiosis is mutualism. And in mutualism, both organisms benefit. An example here is the clownfish and the anemone. So the clownfish live in the anemone, and they get a place to live that's a safe place to live. And the anemone are protected by the clownfish, who's very territorial and chases other fish away that might nip at the anemone's tentacles. The third type of symbiosis is parasitism, and this is where one benefits at the expense of the host. So the parasite is this parasitic copepod that's on a fish, and it attaches to the fish and sucks the blood out of the fish. So it's getting food, and the fish is being harmed by this. It's very similar to the idea of when your dog has fleas and they're eating away at the dog. Reproduction. There are several different ways that fish reproduce. There are pelagic spawners, which are tuna, sardines, and many reef fish. Benthic spawners, which spawn down on the bottom. Brood hiders, like grunion, which hide their brood under the sand. Guarders, damselfish, the males guard the nest. There are bearers, they're mouth brooders such as jawfish and cardinalfish, which hold the eggs in their mouth, and it's the males that hold the eggs in their mouth, and they can't eat the whole time until they hatch, and they protect the eggs that way. And then there's pouch brooders such as seahorses, which the males have the eggs in their pouch. Actually, it's the little baby seahorses, and then they get them big enough to where they can be on their own. And some fish are live bearers. Sharks have claspers if it's a male, so this is a clasper up here, and this is a female shark that doesn't have claspers. So here we have that. And some types of sharks, such as the swell shark, have an egg case, and it's also called a mermaid's purse, and they attach these down on the bottom, and the shark will develop inside this egg case. Here is a skate egg case. Skates are related to sharks. This is a spawning, different types of spawning. So female will enter the territory and they'll do all these displays and different kinds of things. And these are being mounted here, and they're right next to each other and spawning. Sometimes they just go up into the water and release eggs and sperm, such as these wrasses. So you'll see these aggregations of fish, and they're all kind of swimming around together, and there'll be a male swimming around erratically, and then all of a sudden they'll shoot up to the surface and release their gametes. This is a damselfish. It's one of the ones that guards its nest. So here's a damselfish guarding its nest, and they are very protective of that nest. Some fish are hermaphrodites, and that means they have both testes and ovaries at some time in their life cycles. So there's a synchronous hermaphrodite, which has gonads of both sexes at the same time, and then there's sequential hermaphrodites, and sometimes they go from female to male, and this is the most common, and then sometimes they go from male to female. There's different types of feeding in fish, and there's some fish that are carnivores, and then there's many different types of carnivores, and they're labeled depending on what they eat. So piscivores eat fish, planktivores eat plankton, and corallivores eat coral. We will explore pictures of some of the fish and see some of the different ones here. Herbivores are plant eaters. Omnivores eat plants and animals, just like most humans are. And then we have scavengers. And sometimes the position of their mouth can indicate the diet. So if you see the way the mouth looks, you can kind of tell what they're going to eat. So these are some of the different types of mouths. Barracudas have a lot of teeth. So as you may expect, they are predators and they eat other fish. Oh, we have a butterfly fish with a long snout, and these are pickers. A herring with an upturned mouth, and a lot of times when fish have upturned mouths, they are plankton feeders. Parrotfish are scrapers. They scrape algae off the reef, and a slip mouth, which is another plankton type feeder. This is a trumpet fish, and trumpet fish are kind of sneaky in their way they eat. They have a long snout, and in their where their mouth is actually back here where their jaw is. And so what they can do is they can press their jaw tight, and then when they open it, it's kind of like a turkey baster or an eyedropper, and they can suck in a fish from a little ways away. And so they will sneak up on their prey and just slurp it in. A Moorish idol eats mostly sponges, and they have a long snout that they can reach down into little crevices in the reef and eat some encrusting sponges. Another one with a long mouth is the long-nosed butterfly, or this one's called the forceps butterfly fish, and they can reach way down and get little bits of things. They can even eat the little tube feet off sea urchins. This is a parrotfish. You can see its beak, and the parrotfish are very important on the reef because they scrape algae off the reef and leave open spaces so that coral can settle when coral's spawning. So they help to open up new space for other things. And then they take that algae, they take a little bit of coral along with it, and then they grind it up in the back of their throat, and sand comes out. So parrotfish are responsible for a lot of the sand we have on our beaches. This is a butterfly fish, the multiband butterfly fish, and this is a corallivore. It only eats live coral, and it has a very small mouth. It just goes around and picks coral. Here's an eel with its sharp teeth. As you might imagine, this is a predator that eats fish and crabs and things like that. The jack is a fast-roving predator. It swims fast around the reef and chases small fish to eat. And this is a wrasse, and you can notice it has some pretty big teeth too, and they use those to grind up things. They'll eat things like crabs and shrimp and other invertebrates mostly. Then we have the goatfish, which is a bottom feeder. We talked a little bit before about those barbels on the bottom side. They go around and they dig around in the sand and find food and eat that. Then we have sit and wait predators such as the frogfish or the leaf scorpion fish, and they blend in perfectly with their surroundings. This frogfish looks exactly like the coral that it's sitting on, and they just sit there very still and quiet and wait for a fish to swim by so they can jump out and grab it. And the frogfish actually even has another strategy. It has, up on top of its head, it has a fishing pole with a lure on it. And it can wave that lure around, and it looks like a little bit of food, and then a small fish will come up to eat it, and then it will get eaten. This is a hawkfish, and you can notice it has a very large mouth. The better to eat fish that it sits there and waits for them to swim by and jumps out and grabs them. This is a lizard fish, which will live under the sand mostly, or right on the sand and blend in, and it's eating a curious wormfish here. So it was just actually I was trying to take a picture of the curious wormfish, and all of a sudden the lizard fish jumped out and grabbed it, so I got this shot instead. Another type of carnivore is a molluscivore that eats mollusks, and these are spotted eagle rays, and they go down along the bottom, and they can sense with they have ampullae of Lorenzini like the sharks, and they can sense clams and things that live under the sand, and they dig them out, and they have very sharp jaw, a very good crushing jawbone teeth, and they can crush the clam and eat what's inside. These are planktivores, and there are different kinds of planktivores. There's strainers, such as the whale shark and the manta ray, which go through the water with their mouth open and strain out the plankton. And then there's pickers. These fish, like the damselfish with its upturned mouth and big eye. This is a pennant butterfly fish. And then these are garden eels. And these are all fish that pick plankton out of the water. So they don't swim around with their mouth open eating plankton. They just pick individual plankton out of the water. These fish are all corallivores. The top one is a ornate butterfly fish, and this is the multiband butterfly fish that eat coral. And then this one is a damselfish, the blue-eyed damsel, and it also eats coral. Then we have the herbivores, and they're the ones that eat algae. And they go around and eat algae off the reef and are very, very important, because if algae grows unchecked, it can kind of take over a reef and grow over the corals and grow over everything. So the herbivores on the reef are very important, and that's why they designated the Kahekili Herbivore Management Area in Ka'anapali, where they were having problems with algae blooms. They made an area where you're not allowed to fish for herbivores. You can still fish for other fish, just not the herbivores. And in this way, it's helping the reef to recover. Then we have omnivores, which will eat a little bit of everything. They'll eat some plants, they'll eat some animals, they'll eat some invertebrates. And then scavengers and predators. So a lot of people think of sharks as these fierce predators, and they can be that, but they are also scavengers. And what they do is they will go for the sick and dying animals. And if you think about just like the tigers on the African plains, and they go and they look for the one deer that's a little bit slower and sick, and they go for that one because it's easier to catch. So sharks are like that too, and they'll find the fish that's dying or not doing so well and eat that. And in that way they expend less energy to get their food, and also they help us keep the oceans clean. So fish have defense strategies, and sometimes they use them for offense. And these strategies can be coloration, toxins, spines, and schooling. And we'll go through all of these. So one of the things is counter shading. And this is where a fish is dark on the back and light on the bottom. And the reason for that is if something is below it looking up, they're seeing the light part of the fish against the light of the sky. And then if something is over the top of them looking down, they're seeing the dark against the dark of the bottom. Also, coloration can do other things. So one is misdirection. This first fish up here will go in clockwise. This is a butterfly fish, and it has this false eye spot by its tail. So what that does is it fools the predators into thinking that their tail is their head and their head is their tail. And the predators usually go for the head first because the scales are all facing backward and the spines are all facing backward. And if they went for the tail first, they would get a mouthful of spines. So this way they go for the wrong end and the fish gets away. We already talked about counter shading. Warning. A warning is a bright color, and a lot of time in nature when there's something very brightly colored, that is a warning that it's toxic. And in fact, this is a scorpion fish that has toxic spines. Disruptive coloration is like this fish right here. It's kind of hard to tell where its head or tail is. Here's the eye here. And if you imagine this fish in the finger corals, it blends in really well. It's kind of like how a tiger can blend in the grass. Then we have the camouflage of the frogfish here. And then we have bright coloration, which is an advertising coloration. And this is a cleaner wrasse. It's a fish that cleans other fish, and they have this bright coloration to advertise that they're open and ready for business. And they have a symbiotic relationship with other fish, which is mutual, because this fish is getting food and the other fish are getting their parasites cleaned off. Here's a fish with a false eye spot. Hard to tell which is the head and the tail again here. This one has two big spots. It kind of looks like two big eyes, so it might look like a bigger fish than it really is. And a seahorse can blend in with its surroundings. And how do fish change color and do these? They have chromatophores, which are pigment cells that they can get smaller and larger. So they have different colored pigments in different cells, and what they can do is maybe they have several different colors here, and they can make one cell get bigger while the other one gets smaller, and they can change to blend in. So here you can see some of those pigment cells. So they can use that to camouflage, and this is a flounder, and as soon as it lands on the sand, it can blend in perfectly with the sand. Here's another picture, really hard to see. Iridophores are another kind of cell that are in fish's skin, and these are like crystals or mirrors. They're structural part of the skin, and they are shiny. So sometimes you see fish that are very shiny, which is not that one. Okay, and they can use those to change colors, the chromatophores. So here's a yellow tang, and then you saw a trumpet fish before in a different color. If a trumpet fish is hunting and it's around a bunch of yellow tangs, it can change its color to be bright yellow so that the other fish don't see it. And this is a cornet fish changing its color to blend in with the surroundings. Another strategy fish have for avoiding being eaten are to have spines or toxins. So this is a fish with spines. This is a Hawaiian lionfish, and it has these poisonous spines on its back. The puffer fish have toxin in them, and you've probably heard of this, the fugu of the sushi, where if you eat the wrong part you can die, and that is from the toxin that's in puffer fish. And then also these fish have spines on them. So there's the puffer fish. Here's a scorpion fish. Blends in really well, plus it has toxin. The surgeon fish have these spines that they use to protect. We talked before about how they can put their spine out or retract it. So this one is right here. The spine is here, but it's advertising that it has that spine. So it's saying, here's my big spine, don't mess with me. Again, this one's advertising its spines. Some fish will school. These have those iridophores that we talked about, those shiny cells. And schooling fish will school, and they'll all swim together in the same direction. And it's believed that they do this so that it just overwhelms predators, so they might come in and eat one or two, but each individual fish is probably safer in the school. Here's another example of a fish that can change color. These can get bars on them or be almost silvery. Another one with a false eye spot. And this is the advertising coloration. So they're advertising that they're ready for business. Another color function are to let the other fish know whether they're a male or a female. And this is a male wrasse. It has this white right here. If it was a female, it wouldn't have the white. And in this one, these are all the same fish. This is a yellowtail chorus, which is a type of wrasse. And in the juvenile stage, it looks red and white and black like this picture right here. And as it grows up, this is the initial phase, which is almost always a female. And then the terminal phase, which is a male, looks like this. So throughout its life cycle, it changes color. And many of the wrasses are like that. This is a belted wrasse. The one with the orange belt down it is the male, and then the female is very plain looking. Very similar to a lot of our birds, which look like that. So this is a bird wrasse, and again, the female is very plain, and the male is the bright blue-green. Now this is one fish that I think the male doesn't look as good as the female. So the female is on the left, and the male is on the right. This is a Hawaiian hogfish. And that's just a brief overview of some of the features of fish. We'll be talking more about fish in another lecture. Ahui ho!